Hi guys, this is Sami from Aussizz Migration and Education Consultants from Auckland here. As promised, we are going to conduct a live session today, and it would be on post-study employer-assisted visa. So basically, we've had a lot of queries regarding this visa, and there was a lot of confusion, especially between the applicants in terms of when should they be applying for essential skills visa versus when should they be applying for a post-study employer-assisted visa. So I thought this would be a good point for me to cover in today's video. But before we go further in today's video, I want to thank you all for participating and putting a great response for our last video, which we made on expression of interest. So thank you guys, and I would also like to put this disclaimer through before we go on to the topic, that the information that I discuss in today's video is in no ways an immigration advice. And if you want to discuss your case, then you can call us and we can have an appointment fixed to discuss your case in details. But the intention that we have in order to conduct these live sessions is just so that you are equipped with enough information to make informed decisions. So I hope you enjoy this video and you have a lot of questions that gets clarified towards the end of it. So the first question or the first confusion that a lot of students have, or a lot of applicants have rather, is when should they be applying for this visa. So the visa is actually designed for recent graduates who have completed their studies in New Zealand and who want to attain some practical knowledge after their completion of studies. So the first criteria that you need to understand if you are applying for this visa is that you need to have your studies completed from New Zealand. If you have an overseas qualification, then you may be suitable for some other visa, but not for this visa. So the first basic criteria is, do you have a recognized qualification that you have completed in New Zealand? Then you may be eligible for this visa. So that's the first thing. So this visa is only designed for people who want to get some practical experience. So basically, what this visa allows you is if you get this visa, in most of the cases, you will get this visa for 2 years. And in some cases, if you're working towards your occupational registration, for example, maybe nursing or many occupation needs registration, in that case, you would be granted a 3 years visa. But in most cases, if you get granted this visa, it would be for the period of 2 years. Now, once you get this visa, you have to make sure that you are only working in a specific occupation with a specific employer that has been approved. So basically, it is a visa that requires you to work specific to that employer and also the occupation that you are meant to work in before you got granted this visa. So if there are any changes, so for example, let's say if you want to change your jobs, or if you want to change your position title or the location of the job as well, then the first thing you'll need to do before you start working with that change is you'll need to apply for a variation of condition, which is also known as VOC. So what VOC allows you to do is, if you have any changes that needs to be made to your employment, then you have to have an approval through variation of condition. And only if you have the approval, only then you can work on your new job or with your new position. In case if you lose a job, so let's say that you have been granted a post-study employer-assisted visa for doing a particular job with a particular employer, and let's say that 3 months, 4 months down the track, you've lost the job, then technically what it means is that you are not satisfying the work condition of your visa. Hence, you have to contact Immigration New Zealand. Immigration New Zealand might ask you to apply for a new visa that suits your current situation. So basically, it is a visa that is dependent on the job that you have been offered, and also dependent on the employer that has offered you the job. Any changes, or even if you lose a job, then it is important for you to let the immigration know. Or if anything is changing, then it is important for you to do a variation of condition. So this is something you'll have to keep in mind if you are granted this visa. Study, we've had a lot of questions in terms of whether you can study on this visa. You can study for up to 3 months in any 12 months period. So basically, let's say that if you're granted this visa for 2 years, then for the first 12 months, you'll be able to study for up to 3 months. And for the second year as well, you'll be studying for up to 3 months as well. So those are the basic conditions that you need to know if you're granted this visa. Now, what about the criteria? So what makes you eligible for this visa? So as discussed above, this is for applicants who have completed their studies in New Zealand, and that's the first criteria. But what kind of studies do you need to complete? So basically, there are many courses that gets offered in New Zealand. You need to make sure that your course is relevant. So what does the word relevant mean here? So basically, any qualification which is on NZQF framework, which is a New Zealand qualification framework, if it's above level 7 and above, then you need to make sure that that course which you completed went for a minimum of 30 weeks. So that's, if your course was level 7 or more, then you need to make sure that the duration of your course was 30 weeks or more. If you did the course which was between level 4 and level 6 on NZQF framework, then you need to make sure that the duration of your study was at least 60 weeks. So those are the two common level of courses that students come here to do. Either they are enrolled between level 4 and level 6, or they're enrolled for level 7 and more. So just keep in mind that along with the level of studies, which has to be on NZQF framework, you also need to make sure that the duration also meets the requirements. Let's say that if you've done 2 studies, so let's say that if you have done a level 5 course and it only had a duration of 30 weeks, do you qualify for this visa? Well, let's say that if you have done 2 level 5 courses, so let's say that not the 2 level 5 courses, sorry, but let's say one of the courses, the first course was of level 4 and the duration was 30 weeks, and the last course after that was for level 5 and the duration of which was also 30 weeks. In that case, you may qualify, your qualification may be considered recognized. So if you have done 2 qualification, you need to make sure that each qualification was or had a duration of at least 30 weeks, and the last qualification should be higher than the previous qualification. So let's say that if you have done a level 4 course first, then the first thing you'll need to check is whether that level 4 course had a 30 weeks duration. If so, you check your second course. Was it a level 4 course or a level 5 course? Let's say that if it was a level 5 course and the duration of that was also 30 weeks, then you qualify, you meet the requirements of a recognized qualification. So that is if you have 2 different level of qualifications which did not have 60 weeks in total, then you can try and see if you can comply to those requirements by having 2 different qualifications for 2 different durations. So I hope that you understand the first criteria. This is the very basic criteria, that your study should be in New Zealand, but at the same time it should also be recognized, and it should also fulfill the criteria of the duration. The second criteria is, when can you apply for this visa? So the first thing you need to know, and most of the cases, most of the students who apply for this visa are already on their post-study open search. So if you are on a post-study work visa, which is a post-study work visa open, then yes, visa until this visa expires. But let's say that if you have been offered a job that is relevant to your qualification right away, and you don't want to take the post-study open search visa, then you need to make sure that the application for this visa type is made no later than 3 months after the end of your student visa. So let's say that if your student visa expired in 31st March 2018, for example, then you need to make sure that you do not apply for this visa uh, after 30th of June 2018. So if your student visa will be expiring on 31st March 2018, and if you still intend to apply for this visa, then you need to be on a valid visa if you're onshore, or you need to apply for this visa from offshore. So the duration or the application should be made no later than 3 months after the end of your student visa, or the application can be made if you hold a post-study work visa, which is post-study work visa open. And the third criteria is if you are doing a doctoral qualification, if you are enrolled in a qualification, or if you have completed a qualification which was for a doctoral degree, then you have up to 6 months to apply for this visa after your student visa expired. So those are the three things you'll have to keep in mind. So basically, the first thing we looked at was who can apply for this visa, basically the objective and who in general is eligible to apply for this visa. The second thing is what are the basic conditions that gets imposed on this visa, mainly the duration, the work that you can do, the study, and so on. And the third thing we looked at was, the first criteria that we looked at in terms of qualification, as to what qualification and what duration of the qualification you need to have in order to be eligible to apply for this visa. The second criteria is when can you apply for this visa, and that is depending on the course that you're doing or the visa that you hold, you have the relevant time frame. The third criteria, which is the most important and the most confusing criteria, is that the job that you've been offered should be relevant to your job, should be relevant to the studies that you've completed in New Zealand. So basically, what it means is that the major subject area and the level of your qualification should be directly applicable to the employment. That's the first criteria. The second criteria is that the immigration officer should be satisfied that your qualification was a key factor in hiring you. So basically, these two sub-points are the most confusing sub-points, because a lot of people don't know how their major subject area can be relatable to their job. So going back to my first previous explanation as to what is the objective of this visa. Basically, what you have to understand is that the only reason you are applying for this visa is because you want to gain some practical experience to what you've already studied in New Zealand. So that is the main reason why your major subject area and the level of qualification should be directly applicable to the employment. So let's say that you've studied a cookery course, for example, and because it's a cookery course, most of your major subject areas would be related to different cooking subjects. So you would have been taught baking, you would have been taught handling meat, you would have been taught many other cooking skills, and along with those subjects, you would have also been taught some administration, for example, some basic bookkeeping, or how to handle business, for example, to some extent. Now, what you need to understand is that the major subject area was not those business papers or not those bookkeeping papers that you did along with your main cooking subjects. Your major subject area, if your course was related to cookery, was related to cooking. So basically, what you need to know is the job that you've been offered, is this related to hardcore cooking, or is this related to maybe a store manager's role? So for example, if your major subject area was entirely related to cooking, and if you've been offered a job which is for a store manager, then it might be hard for you to relate the main subjects with the offer that you've been given by your employer. But let's say that if your main subjects were cooking mainly, and if you've been offered a job of a sous chef or a head chef, for example, then you can obviously relate your subjects, your study subjects, with the job that you've been offered. So you have to make sure, or you want to make sure, that whatever you have studied as your major subject area, you are only taking this visa because you want to now get some practical experience for the subjects that you've studied. So you will only be able to take the practical experience from the major subject areas, not from the minor subject areas. Now, that's the first thing. The second criteria is that the immigration officer should be satisfied that the qualification was a key factor when your employer decided to hire you. So how can an immigration officer, or how can possibly anyone, know that your employer hired you because of your qualification? So let's say for a job that needs occupational registration, or for a job that is highly technical, it is very easy to make sense that, without the proper qualification or formal qualification, you'd not be able to conduct the job, and it becomes very easy for everyone to judge that the qualification was a main reason for for your employer to hire you. But for jobs that are generic, for example, let's say a job that is for a store manager, you have to make sure, or your employer needs to make sure, that he can only hire you if he needs someone qualified in the business. Whether he needs somebody who's formally qualified to do a job of a store manager. So that's something your employer and you both will have to keep in mind. Now, there are some assessment criteria that immigration officer may look into while assessing whether the subject areas are related to the qualification that you've attained in New Zealand. But at the same time, there are some assessment factors that the immigration officer may look into to determine whether qualification was a key factor to hire you. Now, one of the first assessment criteria, or one of the first things that might be looked at, may be whether the applicant, which is you, make use of qualification in your day-to-day job duties. So, for example, let's say that if you are offered a job of an accountant, and you have a qualification, a formal qualification in accounting, and your duties require you to file taxes or audit and make financial statements, and if all those duties are related to the qualification that you have attained, then you can prove that yes, your day-to-day job duties, or significant portion of your day-to-day duties, match your qualification that you had attained in New Zealand. So that's easy. But let's say that if it's not very obvious that the immigration officer that how your qualification will be used in your day-to-day job duties, then the immigration officer may call your employer, or they may call you to ask you a few questions based on how your duties are related to the qualification, or how will you be using your qualification on a day-to-day basis while conducting those job duties. So that's the first thing that you need to keep in mind for. The second point is, let's say that if you are expected to do various duties throughout the day, then the focus is placed on how much of the time will you be spending doing the task related to your qualification. So remember how I said that you or your employer needs to make sure that the significant portion of your day or week should be spent doing the tasks that are directly applicable to your qualification. So that's something you'll have to do. So going back to my cookery example, for example, let's say that you've been given in your offer, you are required, or you're expected to do various duties, And let's say that 80% of the time you're required to cook as a head chef or as a sous chef, and 20% of the time you're also expected to supervise, or you're expected to do a bit of bookkeeping. So it is a versatile role, and you are expected to do various jobs at various times. But then what will be looked at is how much of the time you spend doing the tasks that are related to your education. So let's say, let me give you an example. So let's say that if most of the time, in terms of, let's say 80% of the time is dedicated towards cooking, and only 20% of the time is dedicated to bookkeeping or keeping records or stock taking, then yes, it is easy for you to relate your qualification to the job that you've been offered. So that's the second point. The third point is the subjects that you have completed should be directly related to the qualification. So most of you, either you have done an NZQA approved course, or you have done the course that is provided by the NZQA. Most of you will have the learning outcomes of each subjects that you have studied. So what you can do is you can look at those learning outcomes, and you can try and relate those to the job that you've been offered and the duties that you would be conducting on a day-to-day basis. So what you have to do is you have to make sure that those duties and the learning outcomes of your subjects, they're both related. So that's something that you'll have to keep in mind as well. Now, another thing that the immigration may consider is whether your job can be done by somebody who's not, who does not have a formal qualification. So let's say, so what this means is the higher the level of your job in terms of the required skill, the better it is to replace somebody. I mean, the harder it is to replace somebody. So, for example, accountant, chefs, you need a formal qualification, a formal training to be able to do the job. But let's say a store manager, for example, a store manager can also be hired via different routes. So you could have store managers employed through based on the fact that they have formal qualification, and they can bring in a lot of value to the organization based on the qualification that they've attained. But at the same time, you may also have store managers appointed from a different route in which they have a lot of experience to do the job, and they could also bring a lot of value to the organization once they're hired. So one point that can be considered is the job that you've been offered, does it really require a qualification? So can this be done by somebody who does not have a qualification? If the answer is yes, then there could be further checks, and that there could be checks in terms of what are the other employers doing? Are they hiring someone majoritarily? I mean, are they hiring people who requires formal qualification, or majority of the employer are hiring someone based on experience? So the job title has, I mean, the job that you have been offered, you have a better chance to prove that qualification was a key factor when you know that the duties that you would be conducting on a daily basis will need technical knowledge that you've attained from New Zealand, from studying in New Zealand. So it is easier for people to apply for this visa when they have a higher qualification, or when they have a specific qualification like accounting or chef. Even let's say marketing, when you have attained a level 7 or level 8 qualification, it's easier for you to prove that you will be bringing a lot of values based on the education that you've attained doing learning new marketing concepts, for example. So that's something you'll have to keep in mind as well. Another thing is if your employer has posted the job that you have been offered, or had posted a job that you've been offered, a lot of the times there are checks done on whether the employer required somebody with the formal qualification in that job title, in that ad post. So for example, if your employer for hiring somebody on the same position had posted an ad in which he or she may have said that no formal qualification is required, and now all of a sudden your employer is saying that, well, for someone to do the job, the qualification is the main criteria, and there is a direct discrepancy between what was being required before and what is required now. So basically, you have to make sure that the employer has genuinely needs someone with New Zealand qualification, or your employer genuinely needs someone with a formal qualification to do that job. And if they have had hirings done before based on experience and not on the qualification, then that has to be a valid reason for that discrepancy. They need to explain why do they now need someone with a formal qualification and not with the experience anymore. Other things that could be checked while assessing your application is whether you are being appropriately paid. So wages are not very crucial on their own, but you have to be making, I mean, your employer has to make sure that they compensate you at least for the amount of qualification that you have attained, and that your your position title would have an average pay scale, so your employer at least pays you up to that level. So for example, if you're doing a skill level 1 job, and if you are just paid the minimum wage, then there could be a potential problem, and there could be further checks in terms of whether you're being paid below the average or above the average or at the average. So these are the factors that the immigration may look for when assessing your application. So you have to make sure that the position that you have been offered genuinely requires someone with a formal qualification that they have attained in New Zealand. So these are the things that you need to keep in mind. Now, let's say that you have been offered a job that meets all the criteria, and you are ready to apply. Then what are the documents you'll need in order to apply? So you obviously, the first thing you'll need is a signed offer letter with the employment contract, and the offer letter or the contract that the offer that you have been provided should be for a full-time job, and possibly it would be good if it's for a permanent full-time position. Along with the employment contract, you also need to provide your transcripts, your degree certificate, or your course completion certificate from the college or university. The police certificate, if the one which was issued last was before 24 months, you'll also need to undergo the medical if you did your medical 36 months before, more than 36 months ago. Along with this, your employer, and this is a very important piece of document, your employer needs to sign and complete the employer supplementary form, which is INZ 1113. And a lot of the employers and a lot of the applicants do not take this form seriously. You have to make sure that you fill in this form accurately and with as much information as possible, because a lot of the questions that the immigration may look for comes from this form only. So for example, how would immigration know if your employer hired you only because of your qualification? Now, there is one of the questions in this form, which is what qualification do you require for someone to do this job? And if, let's say that if you don't fill out this information accurately, then the immigration may think that, well, this job does not require a formal qualification. So this form should be given a lot of seriousness, and it should be filled with a great accuracy. So the form, the employer supplementary form, is something you'll need. You'll need the attested passport copy, and you'll also need the digital photographs. So those are the main documents. Now, along with those documents, you also want to make sure that you write a cover letter from yourselves, by yourself, explaining how the subject areas or how the major subject area are related to the job that you have been offered. And the best way to do that is to again look at the learning outcomes of the subjects. Just read through as to what those subjects taught you if you've already forgotten, and then try and relate that to each duties that you have been offered, and just try and relate your subjects to the duties and see if they can be relatable. And if they can be, then you need to make sure that you write a cover letter explaining how your qualification is relatable to your job. So I hope, guys, this answers a lot of questions, and I hope you enjoyed this video. So we will continue publishing the videos for different visas. So far, we've published videos on essential skills visa, post-study employer assisted visa, and the expression of interest. So we hope to continue. We hope that you guys like these, and and if you have any questions, feel free to call us on 0800 287 749. So just before I sign off, I have a question that has been asked by Chunpun. It is necessary to work 30 hours before 3 months. So 3 months before your student visa expires, or when exactly? If you could elaborate that question a little bit more so that I understand it properly, and then I can answer the question. So thank you, guys. Thank you for listening.